Welcome back to the Complicated Kids podcast. I'm your host, Gabrielle Nicolay, and Kristen Eccleston is back. Kristen, welcome back.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
I am so happy that you're here. If you didn't listen to the first episode, go back and listen to Kristen and I talking about, to Kristen and me talking about, to Kristen and I talking about mental health and neurodiversity. And at the end of that conversation, we started to talk about characteristics of teachers and strategies that teachers use to reach certainly neurodivergent, but also really all students. And so we're sort of going to start unpacking that today. And the reason that I got so excited when we started talking about that the last time is because it's something that I call the special sauce,
Yes.
right? Because there are people who, this is the world according to Gabrielle, there are like people who understand intuitively how to do this, how to connect with another human being. And my hope is that you are going to show us and tell us some things about the skill set that is involved. So can we start to break apart the skill set so that it's not some magical quality, right, that's happening, but like there's actual tools here that people can use, that teachers can use in order to be more effective with their students. And spoiler alert, the reason we want to connect with students is because then they learn.
Yes. Yes. And I used to tell my teachers all the time when I still in the school system that I always tell you, put relationships first, put them first before everything else, because as a teacher, you have the ability to teach, you know what it means to teach, how to get students to learn. But if they're not available for learning, it doesn't matter that you know how to teach. And it's oftentimes that relationship that you can appeal to when a child is not available for learning or isn't feeling it that day. It's that relationship that you can appeal to. And I often hear all the time, teachers' frustration when they say, oh, administration just told me to build a relationship with this kid, and then this kid tears up my classroom, or this happens, just build a relationship. And I see the frustration that teachers have over this concept of just building relationship. But I also think that we don't always recognize that, like you just said, sometimes that's just a skill set that we naturally have. And this is not a beat up or a criticism of people, but sometimes it's just not a skill set that we naturally have. And there are things that you can do or be, I would say it's more being aware of. And that's kind of the secret. It's things that you can do to be aware of. And that's what we can talk about today. But I really do believe that a relationship is the key. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is one time of effort on your part as a teacher by no means is always going to create this relationship that you think is going to happen. Sometimes it can take multiple years, and I can get into why that sometimes takes multiple years as well.
I'm gonna tell you, in graduate school, there's this thing that you're supposed to do in speech therapy school, where the first part of the first session is how they teach it, is to build rapport with the student. And I went in there and I was like, wait, what? Like, build rapport doesn't happen in 10 minutes the first time you meet somebody.
No.
Rapport is something that, if you think of it on a wheel, like, or a spiral, it is something that continues to evolve, right? And so often, and I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here, which is when students start to make progress in speech therapy or in school, we think, oh, now we're on a roll. Now I can get rid of the relationship side and just push the student academically. And now we're like, oh, well, why don't we have this behavior cropping up?
Yeah, no, the relationship should always be at the forefront.
Always, always, always. Okay, for the parents who are listening, whenever we say teacher, just substitute parent, right? Because this is just like human interaction.
Yes.
Not 101, maybe 301 level class here,
Oh,
right?
And I use these same techniques with my children as well, too. And I feel like it has helped, and I still very much maintain that I am your parent boundary. I'm not your friend boundary with my children, but there's still things that I use that I did with students as well, too, because I just think that they're helpful in general. They're just good practices. And I think they're practices too to help you as a parent get your child to open up to you, because oftentimes I think we go as a parent, I had no idea, or this, I didn't realize they were feeling this way. And these are things to kind of help combat that a little bit as well too. All
Yeah. Okay. So regale us, please.
right. So I'm going to start with the more complex and then kind of scale it back, because I feel like that's always the one where you see teachers frustrated that administration told them to go build a relationship with a kid. And I want to say probably those kids are the kids who are probably the ones who I would say are the dysregulated, externalizing type of students.
Okay.
But what teachers need to do for a second is just stop and try and understand the backstory of this child first. Every behavior, no matter what, as all humans, has a root cause to it. Some need is not being met, some frustration is occurring, something is happening for a behavior. The behavior is a manifestation of something that is not, some need that is not being met, essentially. And oftentimes we get student files, right? We get files, you know, we see academic, but we don't always get a backstory of what this child's life has looked like, especially if you're a middle school or you're a high school. And this doesn't mean it doesn't apply to elementary school students, but most of the time by middle school, high school, we've had a lot more life that we've lived as a child. And you don't get any kind of backstory with the kid. And I feel like if you can take the time to understand a kid's backstory or try to find out a backstory, you can sometimes have a better understanding of what that root cause of the behavior is. And I like to share kind of my strategies using stories. So I had a student several years back who it took me a solid 2 years to build a relationship with him. But once I had that relationship with him, this child would have bent over backwards, done hula hoop tricks for me if I had asked him to. But the problem was this child had faced so much trauma in his life. At one point in time, his family had broken up. Dad went out to California. Mom stayed here. He got sent to live with dad in California. Dad, it was just a really abusive, bad situation. He was in 7th grade. He saved enough money because he was like helping dad with odd jobs in California, saved up money, put himself on a Greyhound bus and put himself back across the country to get back to his mom in Maryland.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. 7th grade student. And he was paying off people and not eating for like the 3-day trip that it is across the country, because he thought if he bought people gifts, then they wouldn't attack him or do shady things with him. So he had already right off the bat, by the time I got him in high school, probably not a lot of trust towards adults, not only just from the adults that should be his trusted adults in his life, didn't really solidly back him up. And then he's had some more intensive life experiences with, you know, a Greyhound bus situation. Do you know what I mean? Then probably a typical 7th grader had in their lifetime. So to me, I was probably just one more adult who had the potential to fail him, had the potential to not meet his needs, had the potential to overlook and think, you know, I knew best versus what he had been through. And in all honesty, I had never gone through a life experience like that. I had never had in 7th grade save up money and put myself on a Greyhound bus and go across country. And none of that's going to be in his academic file. That comes out of a conversation. And to be fair, I wasn't even the teacher who had gotten that information. A different teacher had gotten that information. But once I knew that, I had a very different view of this child, because I too would get frustrated with him. Why can't he listen? You know, I'm not asking that hard. And I typically always felt that I was someone who had an easier time of building a rapport with students. So why isn't this kid listening to me? But once I knew that, I had a very different perspective of what this kid's life had looked like, what he had gone through. And what I ultimately realized is he was now testing me. It was my test to fail, or it was my test to pass. Either I got frustrated and continued to, you know, kind of retaliate or get in his face about his behaviors, and I continue to be one more adult in his life who doesn't accept him, doesn't understand him, or he continues to do some of these behaviors and I solidly stand there and back him up. And as soon as that light bulb switched for me and I started to just solidly back him up every time he was in that place of dysregulation, like validating the feelings, being, I don't know if lenient is the right word, but more sympathetic and understanding what was going on, it was like our dynamic switched immediately, because I then finally passed the test. I showed him that regardless of what face he showed me that day, I would continue to be a solid adult and not one more adult who had failed him or washed their hands of him. And that ended up being the difference.
I mean, what we're talking about really is unconditional love.
Yes. Yeah.
And children will, because their survival depends on it at a certain level, right? And because we're wired for connection, they will continue to seek it out. And this kid, had enough bad experiences to know he shouldn't actually trust you. Like,
Yeah.
it's too risky.
Yes.
Um,
Absolutely.
and so I think obviously there's so much going on here, but even from the teacher's perspective, and I think, and I will include myself in this group, like, you correct me if I'm wrong, we pride ourselves in being, I'm putting air quotes, good with kids.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get one like this, and now you're agitated. I'm agitated, the adult, because I can't reach this one.
Yes.
And I think it's something to do with him,
Mm-hmm.
me. And really what it is just failing to recognize, okay, look, this is your test.
Yes.
And stand back in the places and in the ways that you do have authority and power, which is, by the way, over your own reactions.
Mm-hmm.
Only.
Yep.
And now he can see what we're made of. But there's so much, like, kind of like curtains we have to get through before we find that place. Sometimes it's hard.
100%. And it was, and I admit, like, it was probably my own insecurity. We tend to respond at an emotional level to our own insecurities or things that we are already grappling with, from a psychological standpoint. And then something like that is reinforcing an insecurity that already lives within us. And I thought I'm great with kids. And now he's making me question, like, am I actually great with kids? So, was really my own insecurity, had nothing to do with him, but it took me understanding that this was a test for me. Even though I'm coming at the mindset, I haven't done anything to this kid, but I hadn't done anything to earn from this kid either. And he's already coming to me in a place of a deficit. He's not coming to me at neutral ground. He's not coming to me just open-handed, trusting, that I'm going to do right by him. He has already had enough life experiences that every adult he has interacted with, both in school and in life, has done him dirty or not supported him in whatever capacity. And it was my job to show him that you can throw everything you want to throw at me, and I'm still going to keep supporting you. Yeah. And as soon as I made that realization, it changed. But sometimes it's having to stop and almost, I call it Q-tip, quit taking it personal. It's not a personal thing, right? It's me having to recognize that I have to show this child something different than what he had previously experienced from other adults in his life.
Q-tip, quit taking it personally. This is, I like, just stick that in the back of your head and pull it out every so often.
I used to say that to teachers when we were trying to problem solve. If you could see that the teacher was starting to get agitated, it was a way to just say Q-tip, and then they knew without me having to say the whole thing to them, like, maybe I need to bow out or let another adult come in. And I see that too, even in the work that I do now. We oftentimes, as an adult, we let our ego come in, and it's like, I have to be the one who saved this kid, or I'm the one who spent all this time. So I've spent a year working with this kid. I'm not going to let this other adult come in and, God forbid, in 2 minutes, they fix the problem. And I've spent 2 years. And sometimes you just have to Q-tip it, right? Like, it's not anything to do with you. Maybe you just aren't that kid's person, and that's okay. Wouldn't you rather the fact that the kid found the person that's making the difference, and they found their person, they found their trusted adult, rather than you keep trying to push something it's just not going to happen for the kid? But it's our ego as adults that often make us continue when we should say, hey, you as my colleague, I think you've got this one, and I'm okay with that, because ultimately at the end of the day, it's what's best for the kid.
Yes, 100%. Oh my gosh. Okay. Wow. So that was one strategy, y'all. So go back and listen to it again.
And then I have the things, I have things that are more small. So that's my major, like, if you're having a kid who's just like, no matter what I try, that kind of go to that story. Yeah. But then I also have a lot of things behind. So I shared in our last podcast, I'm ADHD. I went through school, not liking school, not enjoying it. And so a lot of what I use now, I think one of the reasons that I was good with kids was because I used my own personal experiences of what I wish my teacher had looked like, or what school would have looked like for me. And I think ultimately that ended up working out in my favor and the students that I had relationships with. And some of those things are, one, being vulnerable. And I
Mhm.
don't mean vulnerable and sharing like all your personal life story, but I mean, I didn't like school when I was younger. I struggled academically when I was younger, but I don't ever remember hearing teachers say that to me. I don't ever remember teacher being like, I had the same thing happen. It was always this kind of idea that your teachers were on this pedestal. They were the experts and knew everything. And I was always open with kids like, hey, math was not my jam. And I had to take algebra twice in high school. And I didn't like it when I was there. Like I let kids know my vulnerabilities and my insecurities instead of thinking I was some expert who knew everything. I let them know that I have struggled before. I still struggle with things. And I think that makes a big difference.
I agree with you. And I think that there are many people who are fearful of showing any kind of vulnerability. I mean, I guess I kind of have some sense for where that comes from, but what do you say to parents or to teachers when they're like, if I do that, it's going to be trouble or it's going to be bad? Like, how do you have something that you say that like convinces people? What's the
I
thing?
tell them, I disagree with you. You're humanizing yourself, is what you're doing. None of us are perfect. Not anybody in this entire world, even if it looks like they have their life together, is perfect. We are all dealing with something. And a child does so much better when they realize that what they're dealing with does not make them alone. It does not make them a weirdo. You're not going through this by themselves, that you understand, because either you yourself, and I say this as a parent too, like I have a child with ADHD. She doesn't like school. It very much, to me, it is a mirror of what I went through. And I tell her it's okay. Like all I want is for you to try your best. I want you to go your best, but I know that not always is the learning situation going to be ideal for how your brain works. And there's going to be times where you're frustrated, but it's not a true characterization of what you're capable of. And then I try to show my daughter what I have accomplished since I've left school, but more so just so that she understands that she's in a one size fits all setting with not a brain that fits that one size fits all setting. And I think the more we can talk to kids about what our challenges were, because I find that the more adults that I talk to too, most of us ended up feeling that way when we were in school. But like you said, we don't talk about it. But I think a lot of us are embarrassed. It's like this idea, unless you were a 4.0, 1600 SAT score, Ivy League adult, nobody wants to talk about it because we don't want anyone to think we were stupid or that we weren't capable. But really, it's just education is different for all of us. And we need to show that vulnerability because it humanizes us to kids.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's so spot on. It's making me think of my daughter's, one of her teachers, who basically told the whole class the other day. And again, I'm telling this story to push those fear buttons a little bit, of people who might be listening, where he was like, yeah, I was terrible in school. I don't know if he said he smoked a lot of pot, but I did things I shouldn't have done. And I ended up having to go to community college because I didn't get into any 4-year schools. And I didn't really even like that. So I took a year off. He's a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
He is doing what he loves. He's doing it very well. And the students, I kind of asked my daughter to tell me what the response was. And she was like, we thought that was amazing.
Yes.
And now he has raised his credibility
Mm-hmm.
so much that he can issue a challenge, an academic challenge, a life challenge to the students. And they're going to be like, well, if Mr. So-and-so did it, I guess I can figure this out too. And
Mm-hmm.
I actually have goosebumps right now as I'm telling you this, because I 100% agree with you. It is powerful for kids to see imperfection married with success.
Yes, 100%. And I think oftentimes as teachers, we wanted to be able to come across as this, this is the idealism of who we are. And, we're the teacher, so we're knowledgeable. We're supposed to be the expert, so we can't have this. And I have always found that if you're kind of more open with what your challenges have been, that kids are accepting of that. And it makes them, I almost feel like you see a level of ease come over them too, that like, okay, I don't have to like achieve at here, like, I can just do my best and that's enough. And I feel like it's just, you see this stress melt away from them because they go, I can still be successful and still, not be perfect. And that is okay. And I think that's important for kids, because I think that's where we see a lot of some of those perfectionism tendencies come in from kids, that stress level come in from kids, is because they have this idea that they have to constantly be perfect in order to be successful. And actually, failure can be some of the most beautiful gifts in becoming successful, because there's so many lessons to be learned in failure.
All of the neuroscience research, all of the education research, all of the psychological research, resilience, all of it would tell you exactly that. Failure is way more valuable. Getting comfortable with making mistakes will help you grow and get smarter and better performing and achieve more if you can handle the discomfort of something that doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And when we present this veneer of perfection, and then we just I don't even really know, we're not really thinking about it, so I think it's an old model, but when kids see that and they don't see any way to break in, and then it's like, well, I can't be that, so forget it, I'm out. Particularly with the neurodivergent kids, right? Because they're already facing a system that's kind of stacked against them.
Yes.
And I always say, if you can't be good at being good, you're going to get really good at being bad.
Yeah. And oftentimes I think you see kids self-sabotage themselves as well as a result of that, because it's easier for me to have failed on my own accord rather than for me to have given it everything I've got and still fail. Because either way, I feel like I'm failing, but at least I'm in control of how I failed.
Yes. Yes. And again, that control over my own destiny, right? Like I know I can't achieve this thing that you're setting out over here, so I'm going to make my own way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ooh, deep. Oh my gosh. Okay. So we're sort of, let's drag ourselves back, shall we? To creating this relationship with students. So getting out of the way, prioritizing relationship over time, and maybe a long time, is what I hear you saying.
Sometimes you have kids who are just like, if that's a cool teacher, I can tell that's a cool teacher. I still do a thing. If you were ever to see me to speak in person, I am always wearing sneakers, and they're usually like some kind of trendy, like Vans or something. And I had somebody ask me why one time, and I said, because the whole time I taught, I always kept up to date on shoe trends, because it was always in like a conversation starter with kids, the fact that I was wearing the trendy shoe of the time. I've had so many different shoe trends throughout my career, and that was just kind of one of my things, is I would pick up on what all the kids were wearing, and then that would kind of become my shoe of choice. And even to this day, I do it, and I'm dressed I'm dressed professionally speaking with a pair of Vans on. But that's because, and when people ask me, I can say, because that was always my way in with kids. I knew shoes were not changing anytime. The trend of the moment might, but like shoes are always something kids use to express themselves. And seeing an adult who was kind of hip on the trends was usually pardon this lame analogy, a foot in the door, essentially, to be able, right? Terrible. To be able to have a conversation with kids. And so it's finding things like that. And I also wasn't afraid to take time from class too. If I knew it was going to be more beneficial in the long run to take the class period and just like let everybody kind of goof off and have but in a conversational way, like talk about a hot topic, or get on a current event and get everybody to a structured debate, or let somebody be a joke or whatever, then I took the time to do that, because that in itself was in a way team building too. So, and it was allowing me to build connections with multiple kids at one time within the class setting. And I know teachers are under a lot of pressure, and this comes down from higher ups of like, this is the curriculum and you have to be done with this information by this day. But I promise you, taking one class period will end up helping you with the timeline, rather than trying to like get information down kids' throats when they're just not available for it. Because once you have that relationship, you can then appeal, and you can also incentivize, like I will bring in Smarties for everybody, or I will bring in whatever for everybody. And they'll know, because of the relationship you established, that you're going to be good on your word.
My mother-in-law she's retired now, is a master at this. She taught in a like podunk town in Oklahoma for many years, the AP Spanish class. These were students, not a Spanish speaker among them. She would get through the curriculum in like March or April of the school year, and the rest of the time, and she would tell them this at the outset, if we get through the curriculum, we are going to learn how to do Spanish cooking, Spanish dancing, and I'm going to teach you some stuff about like culture. And they would do it, number one, and those students, her classes were always full, and they were always full with like all the students, not just like the best students, right? But the students who wanted to work hard. And then they would get through the curriculum, and all of her students, like I think at one point she was the highest, her students were the highest performers on the AP test in the entire state.
Oh, wow.
But it came down to this kind of, I think it's two things. One is I'm showing interest in you, which is what you're describing with the shoes, and just even the like, okay, you guys are showing me that today it's a talking day. Like you're not listening, you're talking today. And so now I am listening, right? And so I'm modifying accordingly. And then the other thing is she kind of joined with them to create this collaborative effort of like, hey, this is a team. If we do this together, we're going to get to do this other thing together. And then sort of incentivizing with that. She was a very challenging teacher, but she was also an exceptionally loving teacher.
And I'm glad you said that, because you don't have to sacrifice one for the other either.
Yeah. It's, I think we conflate high standards with high demands. Those two things are not necessarily the same. And then I think we also conflate high standards that need the absence of love. That somehow work and love don't sit next to each other, which is, of course, what this whole conversation is about. They do. They need to. The showing interest is a really interesting one, I think, because I think sometimes we forget that children are people.
Yes.
And for a second,
let's talk about that for a second, because this is the one thing I will also say that I feel bad for teachers about. And you and I both know that there have been teachers in this world who have had bad intentions and have done bad things and have created a world where now, I think there's a lot of hyper vigilant, hyper aware teachers that, I'm not going to do things because I don't want to be accused of stuff. And on a degree, I 100% understand that. I had a teacher I was in charge of who fell into that category, and it rocked my world as the person who oversaw that teacher. And so I am hyper vigilant of that, but it's really, really sad that there have been people like that, because there are also some kids who come to school every day who need a hug from their teacher. And there's nothing inappropriate or sexual or, ill-intended behind it, other than, some kids don't have stable, loving home environments. Some do, and that's fantastic, and that's wonderful, and I'm glad they do. But some kids don't. And having that reassuring kind of hug from a teacher, or just knowing somebody's in your corner, or somebody's going to show up to your musical or your soccer event, whatever it might be, and knowing that someone supports you, it can be really, really big for kids, and that can be a relationship builder too. And I think there are probably some teachers, and again, this is not a criticism towards teachers, because I understand the box they've essentially been put in because of other people's actions. But I think there are sometimes teachers who struggle with the relationship piece, because there's that fear too associated with, could I get accused of, or is this going to look like, what is this going to mean? And I'm not that person, so I don't want to potentially get put into that. And I've always been really fortunate that, when I worked with students specifically with mental health needs, I had students who needed hugs. And I told my principal straight up, I was like, I hug kids. Like, I hug kids, and I'm not, it's always in front of people in the middle of a hallway type of thing, because, I'm not going to hug a kid in like a closed door situation. But I hug kids because some kids just need that. And he understood that, and he was kind of the same way. And so I was fortunate in that. But it is really unfair that people have created scenarios for teachers, because I do think that has hindered some people from being able to build solid relationships, because there is a lot of fear. And can I support this kid the way I know they need to be supported, because I don't want to be accused or be seen of doing something inappropriate.
Right. And I think that is where we back up against systems.
Yeah.
Just like a whole other conversation that just really gets me aggravated. So we're not going to have that one.
Yeah. That's fine. That's fair. That is fair.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth saying that I recognize that can sometimes hinder relationship building as well.
For sure. And so I think, maybe where the do is like, know where your backstop is and know what you're comfortable with.
Yes.
And then consider kind of these other ways consider that not hammering home the lesson that you prepared is the right way to go. Somebody said something brilliant in one of our Raising Orchid Kids classes last session. And he's an engineer. And so this came like off the plant floor, which was sometimes you have to go slow in order to go fast.
Yes. And that is true. That is so true. And that's essentially the point that I think you and I are both making is, I think people see it as a time waster, but really it's not. When you have those relationships to appeal to, it could be a lifesaver, because you can say, hey guys, I know it's really hard today, or we're not getting through this today, but like, I need you to rally behind me. I need your support. And they're only going to do that if you've taken the time to have established relationships beforehand, because then they'll do it for you, because they love you as their teacher, and they understand that they're essentially doing you a favor, and they're willing to do you that favor because of that relationship. But if you ask them like, hey guys, I really need you to rally, and you have no relationship, that's your problem, lady, not my problem. That, and then that becomes the mentality.
And this is the relationship bank account. We talk about this at Raising Orchid Kids too, right? You got to put in before you make withdrawals.
Yes. You
have to make a lot of deposits, and that's positive. There's a term for it in psychology. What is it called? Something positive regard. Unconditional positive regard, right? Which is like, I see you, you are a person, you are a fully formed human, and I accept you for who you are. And then instances where they can be successful and showing our vulnerabilities, all of the things that we've been talking about here are deposits into that relationship bank account, so that when the test is coming up and you say, hey guys, we got to buckle down. I know.
Yep.
And you make that small withdrawal, you still have funds in your bank account.
Yes. And you don't have to make big deposits either. Little things like, I noticed your haircut, or is that a new pair of shoes? Or, oh my gosh, I love your handwriting. Or, you make me smile. Or like, you're so fun. Like little things too, but just like noticing your student, just being aware of your student, not just this, you come into my classroom, you're here for 45 minutes, you leave, but while they're there, you're noticing them. You're drawing attention to them. You're making a moment for them to feel special. Those are all little deposits that build up over time.
I love it. We're going to pin it there. Thank you for coming back.
Thank you for having me. I love our conversation. So thank you so much for having me.
You are so welcome. If people want to find you, how do they do that?
The easiest way to find me is www.theneurodiverseteacher.com. From there, you can find, I work with Weinfeld Education Group, and it links you out from there, but you can just learn more about me and ways to be in touch with me.
Fantastic. And we will link to that in the show notes, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.